The courtyard of Jefferson High trembled with noise. A group of older boys had cornered a freshman near the flagpole. His books lay scattered across the pavement, trampled by sneakers. "Say it again, nerd," one of them sneered, pushing him hard against the pole. The crowd of students only whispered, too afraid to step in. Then a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Stop right there! Do you boys know what the Education Code, Section 220, says about harassment on school grounds?" The courtyard froze. Every head turned toward the school gate where Mrs. Eleanor Reed stood, clutching her ring of jangling keys like a sheriff with a badge. Wrinkles lined her face, her gray hair tied in a loose bun, the faded security jacket hanging awkwardly on her frail frame. To most students, she was just the old gatekeeper, a background fixture, silent and forgettable. But now, her eyes blazed. "You are violating not only school policy," she said, marching forward, "but state law. Section 220 ensures every student's right to education free from discrimination or harassment. Shall I call the superintendent and the police, or will you hand over your IDs right now?" The boys faltered. Their laughter died. Nobody had ever heard the gatekeeper speak like that. The courtyard of Jefferson High was never quiet in the mornings. It was the place where everything collided. Sneakers squeaking across concrete, shouts from the basketball court, laughter spilling from clusters of teenagers with backpacks slung over one shoulder. The September sun had not yet climbed high, but its warmth was already filling the square between the flagpole and the front steps of the school. On that particular morning, however, the hum of student chatter was disrupted by a sharper sound: books hitting the ground. A boy, thin, pale, his shirt collar slightly crumpled, scrambled to pick up his papers as three older boys circled him like predators closing in on prey. His backpack had been yanked open, spilling notebooks, folders, and pens across the asphalt. One of the bullies kicked a math workbook with the tip of his sneaker, sending it skidding several feet away. "Say it again, nerd," the tallest one sneered, his voice carrying across the courtyard. His Letterman jacket identified him as part of the junior football squad. His grin was wide, but his eyes had the cold glint of someone who enjoyed the game of fear. The freshman pressed his back against the flagpole. His hands shook as he tried to gather his papers, only for another boy to slap them out of his grip. They fluttered to the ground again, white pages against gray concrete. Around them, other students formed a hesitant circle. Some muttered under their breath, others simply watched. A few had their phones half raised, uncertain whether to record or to intervene. Nobody stepped forward. The unspoken rule of high school territory was ironclad: don't get involved. The tallest boy shoved the freshman hard against the pole. The metallic clang reverberated through the courtyard, louder than laughter, louder than whispers. The freshman winced, his jaw tightening as he tried to hold back tears. And then came a voice, not loud in pitch, but sharp in command, like a gavel striking wood. "Stop right there!" The words cut through the air so suddenly that even the basketball game on the far end of the yard paused. Heads turned, eyes searching. And there she was, Mrs. Eleanor Reed, the gatekeeper. She stood near the iron gates, her key ring clutched in one hand, its metal teeth catching the sunlight. Her security jacket hung loose around her frail shoulders, the sleeves rolled up as though the fabric itself were too heavy. Her gray hair was pulled into a bun, but strands had escaped, fluttering against her lined face in the morning breeze. To most of the students, she was nobody. Just the old lady who unlocked doors each morning. She didn't belong to the world of Snapchat filters, TikTok dances, and varsity pride. She belonged to the background, silent, invisible, unremarkable. But in that moment, there was nothing invisible about her. Her eyes blazed. "Do you boys know what the Education Code, Section 220, says about harassment on school grounds?" she demanded. The courtyard fell into silence. The freshman, still pressed against the flagpole, looked up in shock. The bullies exchanged puzzled glances, unsure whether to laugh or to back away. The tallest one smirked. "What code? What are you even talking about?" Eleanor stepped forward. Her keys clanged like spurs at her side. "You are violating not only school policy," she said, her voice ringing with the clarity of someone who had spoken in lecture halls, "but state law. Section 220 guarantees that no student shall be harassed, humiliated, or discriminated against in any program receiving state funding. That includes this school." Her hand slipped into the pocket of her jacket, pulling out a small, worn leather notebook. She flipped it open with practiced ease, eyes scanning underlined sentences. Her voice grew stronger as she read. "California Education Code, Section 220. No person shall be subjected to discrimination on the basis of disability, gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or any other characteristic in any program receiving state financial assistance." She closed the notebook with a snap that echoed louder than the sneakers, louder than the whispers. The students were stunned. Even the bullies hesitated, their bravado faltering. "Now," Eleanor continued, extending her hand, "you will hand me your IDs, or I will call the principal and the superintendent. And if necessary," her gaze hardened, "the police." The tallest boy's smirk faltered. His friends shifted nervously, glancing at the watching crowd. Some of the students were recording now, phones angled at the scene. The court of high school opinion had turned, and the bullies were losing. One of them muttered, "She's bluffing." But something in her stance, in the authority of her tone, said otherwise. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't backing down. The freshman's papers still lay scattered across the ground. Eleanor's eyes flicked toward them, then back at the boys. Her silence pressed heavier than her words. Finally, the tallest bent down, scooping up the math workbook he had kicked aside. He shoved it roughly back toward the freshman, muttering a reluctant, "Here." The others followed, mumbling apologies, their heads lowered. The crowd broke into whispers again, but this time they weren't about the freshman. They were about her. "Did you hear her quote the law? She sounded like a lawyer or something." "No. My brother said she used to be a professor." Eleanor slipped the leather notebook back into her pocket and stood straighter, her gaze sweeping the courtyard. The freshman clutched his books tightly, eyes wide with something between gratitude and awe. The bullies slunk away, muttering curses under their breath. The circle of students dispersed slowly, many still casting glances toward the gatekeeper. Phones buzzed with texts and social posts. The old lady at the gate just shut down the football guys, and just like that, the courtyard returned to its usual rhythm. Sneakers squeaked, laughter resumed. But the air felt different, as though something had shifted. Eleanor Reed turned back toward her post at the gate, her keys jangling softly at her side. Her expression was calm, but her heart was pounding. She had not spoken that way in years. Not since the days when classrooms had been her courtroom, when chalk and statutes had been her tools. She touched the edge of the notebook through her jacket, as if to remind herself it was real. The freshman's voice carried faintly behind her. "Thank you, ma'am." She allowed herself the smallest of smiles. For the first time in years, Eleanor felt the echo of her past stir within her. She had silenced bullies before, not in schoolyards, but in courtrooms, committee hearings, and lecture halls. And as the morning bell rang, she wondered if perhaps the part of her life she thought was gone forever had not left her at all. Eleanor Reed had not always been the gatekeeper. Long before the jangling of keys and the faded jacket, she had stood in front of towering lecture halls, her voice commanding the attention of 100 eager minds. The memory was sharp, as if etched in chalk dust, a young Eleanor in her 30s, standing tall at the front of the state university's law department. Her brown hair had not yet turned silver, her back was straight, and her eyes gleamed with certainty. She wrote boldly on the blackboard in block letters, "Education is the practice of justice." Her students scribbled notes furiously. Eleanor never just lectured, she challenged. She walked up and down the aisles asking questions that pinned her students in place. "What does Section 504 guarantee?" she demanded, pausing in front of a boy in the second row. "That no student with disabilities can be excluded from educational programs," he answered nervously. "And if a school fails to provide that support?" she pressed. "It's a violation of federal law." "Exactly," she said, tapping her chalk against the desk. "Law isn't abstract. It's not words in dusty books. It's lived every single day, in classrooms, in playgrounds, in cafeterias. When we defend a student's right to learn without fear, we defend democracy itself." Applause sometimes followed her lectures, not because she sought it, but because her conviction filled the room. Students said she made the law feel alive, like fire that could either protect or burn, depending on who held it. A voice beyond the classroom. Eleanor's reputation grew beyond campus. She was invited to speak at conferences, to testify before education committees, to contribute to reform journals. She was quoted in articles about anti-discrimination policies, her words reaching further than she had ever imagined. Yet for all her acclaim, Eleanor never let go of the small things. She remembered the names of her students. She noticed the quiet ones who sat in the back and encouraged them to raise their voices. She reminded every young lawyer in training that their degree meant nothing if they forgot the faces of the children their work was supposed to protect. Justice, she often said, was not an idea. It was a practice. Her office walls were lined with books, constitutional law, civil rights in education, Brown v. Board of Education case studies, but also photos, her husband Daniel, smiling behind a camera, and their daughter Sarah with her gap-toothed grin on the first day of kindergarten. Those walls held not only law, but love. The fall. But life has a way of eroding the strongest walls. Daniel, her husband, was a journalist with ink-stained fingers and a passion for truth that matched Eleanor's own. He was her anchor, her partner in every debate, the man who brought her late-night coffee when she stayed grading papers until dawn. When the diagnosis came, it shattered their rhythm. Cancer. Aggressive. A word that felt like a verdict before the trial. Eleanor spent months moving between hospital rooms and classrooms, teaching by day and holding his hand by night. She quoted statutes to him, almost desperately, as though law could protect him from the relentless march of disease. "You'll beat this," she whispered once, her voice trembling. "You have to. Justice doesn't let the innocent suffer." Daniel had only smiled weakly, brushing her cheek with frail fingers. "Justice doesn't work that way, Elle." He passed away one winter night, snow falling outside the hospital window. Eleanor had gone home to an apartment full of books and silence. She returned to teaching, but something inside her voice had cracked. She spoke the same words, taught the same laws, but the fire in her chest dimmed. Students noticed. She no longer lingered after class to answer questions. Her office hours shortened. Her laughter disappeared. Then came her own illness, heart complications, the kind that demanded rest. The doctor's orders were firm: retire. And so, Eleanor Reed, once a professor with a voice that carried across the state, left the lecture hall for good. The search for purpose retirement did not suit her. She was only in her late 50s, but the days stretched endless and gray. Her daughter Sarah had moved to a nearby town, urging Eleanor to live closer. One morning, while walking past Jefferson High, she saw a flyer taped to the front gate. Part-time gatekeeper needed. She had almost laughed. What did she know about being a gatekeeper? But something about it pulled at her. The job was simple, quiet. No students to lecture, no committees to impress, no papers to grade, just a gate, a booth, and children passing by every day. She applied. They hired her, and so the professor became the gatekeeper. The weight of invisibility. At first, Eleanor found a strange peace in the work. She liked arriving early when the campus was still empty and the air smelled of fresh dew. She liked unlocking the doors, hearing the click of tumblers as though each sound marked the beginning of someone's story. But soon, the peace became loneliness. Students passed her daily, barely glancing her way. Some muttered greetings without waiting for a reply. Others mocked her under their breath. Crazy old lady. She's so slow with the keys. She's just here to open gates. Eleanor pretended not to hear, but the words settled on her like dust. Each insult was a reminder of how invisible she had become. Once her words had shaped minds. Now she was background noise. Yet she noticed everything. She saw the freshman who always walked alone, the sophomore who tried to hide bruises beneath long sleeves, the senior whose laughter masked exhaustion. She had spent her life reading cases and laws, but here she read faces. She carried her leather notebook every day, tucked deep in her jacket pocket. Its pages were filled with statutes she had once taught, underlined, highlighted, annotated with furious care. To anyone else, it looked like the relic of a forgotten past. But to Eleanor, it was still a weapon of justice. Waiting. She told herself she would never need it, that her classroom days were over. But some part of her knew, justice does not retire. The whisper of memory. When she returned home each evening, she often lingered by her bookshelf, running her fingers across the spines of her old law books. Sometimes she opened one, reading aloud to no one. She missed the rhythm of it, the way her words had once carried authority. She wondered if her knowledge still mattered, if she had been reduced to nothing more than a silent figure in a booth, if all she had fought for had evaporated with her husband's last breath. The courtyard incident, years later, would answer those questions. But in those quiet years, she did not know. She only waited. Waited for the moment when the world might need her again. Eleanor Reed quickly learned that invisibility was both a shield and a prison. Her mornings at Jefferson High began before sunrise. The dew clung to the iron bars of the gate as she unlocked each padlock, the air damp with the smell of freshly cut grass. Students rarely arrived that early. It gave her a sliver of peace, a time to imagine she was still preparing for a lecture, not just opening doors. But the peace never lasted. By 7:30, the steady tide of students flooded the courtyard. They streamed past her booth, earbuds in, laughter bouncing off brick walls, eyes glued to phones. Very few offered greetings. Those who did spoke without looking, their mourning tossed like scraps on the wind. Others were less polite. "Watch out, Grandma, don't break a hip with those keys." "She probably thinks Facebook is still cool. Why do we even have her here? A robot could do her job." The words rolled off their tongues with casual cruelty, as if mocking the old gatekeeper were as natural as brushing lint off a sleeve. Eleanor kept her face calm. She answered with silence. Always silence. She had lived too long, seen too much, to let the sting of adolescent scorn penetrate her armor. And yet, when she returned home at night, their words replayed in her mind like faint echoes, invisible, unnecessary, out of place. She told herself it didn't matter, but deep down, it did. Observing the unseen. If students believed she was invisible, Eleanor found a strange advantage in that. They forgot she was listening. They forgot her eyes were sharp. She saw the quiet boy in glasses who ate lunch alone behind the science wing. She saw the girl whose laughter turned brittle whenever her so-called friends surrounded her. She saw a teacher bark at a student with an accent, dismissing his question as if it were stupidity rather than courage. She cataloged these injustices the way she once cataloged statutes. She didn't write them down. She didn't need to. They lodged in her memory like stones in a wall. Once, she caught a group of girls sneaking out of class, one of them in tears. She heard their whispers as they passed. "Don't tell anyone. She'll get in trouble if you do." Another time, she spotted a football player cornering a freshman near the locker rooms, his voice low and menacing. Eleanor had stepped forward then, keys jangling in warning. The boy backed off with a smirk, muttering, "Whatever, old lady." No one else noticed. No one else cared. To them, she was only a shadow at the edge of their vision. But shadows see everything. The notebook. Eleanor carried her small leather notebook everywhere. The students assumed it was for jotting down gate schedules or visitor passes. In truth, it contained decades of law, education codes, civil rights statutes, key court cases she had once taught with passion. Each page bore underlines, annotations, faded ink from years of study. Her husband had once teased her about it. "You treat that thing like a sword," he'd said, and perhaps it was. Now, as she sat in her booth, she sometimes flipped through the pages, whispering the words under her breath. She read them not for students, not for colleagues, not for committees, but for herself. To remember that she was more than the keys jangling at her side. She thought of justice like a muscle. If you didn't use it, it withered. And though she rarely flexed it anymore, the strength was still there, waiting. The growing tension. As the years passed, Eleanor noticed the small cruelties piling higher. Bullying became subtler, cloaked in jokes, masked in memes, hidden behind glowing screens. She heard a boy call another loser in the cafeteria, his voice rising just enough for the crowd to hear. She saw a girl's locker plastered with sticky notes that read, "Go back where you came from." She noticed the way teachers sometimes turned a blind eye, dismissing cruelty as kids being kids. Eleanor clenched her jaw, her hands tightening around her keys. Every time she wanted to step forward, to intervene, she stopped herself. It wasn't her place. She was no longer Professor Reed. She was the gatekeeper. And yet, each moment left a mark. By the time autumn rolled around again, the courtyard was heavy with tension only she seemed to feel. Students laughed, shouted, played. But underneath, Eleanor saw fear, shame, loneliness. She could almost predict who would be mocked next, who would be cornered, who would be left out. Her silence grew heavier. Her notebook seemed to burn in her pocket. The mockery. There were days when even teachers forgot her worth. One afternoon, she overheard two staff members near the parking lot. "Why do we even keep her? She's old. Retirees don't belong in security." "She's harmless and cheap. District saves money." They laughed, walking away. Eleanor stood still, her hand brushing the edge of her notebook in her pocket. Harmless, invisible, forgotten. That night, she sat by her bookshelf, staring at her old casebooks. She opened Brown v. Board of Education and read the lines she had once recited with fire. Education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. It is the very foundation of good citizenship. Her throat tightened. Once she had taught this truth to hundreds of students. Now she sat alone, her only audience the hum of the refrigerator. But she could not shake the thought, justice does not expire, it waits. A faint rumor. It was around this time that a rumor began among the students. "Did you know the gatekeeper used to be a lawyer?" one whispered. "No, she was a professor, I think." "Really? Nah, she's just some old lady with a notebook." The rumor flickered and died as quickly as it spread. Students preferred their myths flashy, not quiet truths. Still, Eleanor caught the whispers sometimes. And though no one asked her directly, she felt the old weight of expectation pressing against her chest. Part of her feared it. Another part longed for it. The waiting. Every morning, Eleanor stood at her post, watching the sea of students pour past her. She felt the duality inside her, gatekeeper on the outside, professor on the inside. Silent in the booth, loud in memory, invisible in the courtyard, burning with words no one asked to hear. She wondered often if her moment had passed forever. And then, one morning, it happened. The sound of books hitting the pavement, the cruel laughter of older boys, the hush of a courtyard waiting to see what would unfold. Eleanor's heart thudded. Her keys jingled as she stepped forward. For years, she had been silent. For years, she had been invisible. But justice had not left her. It had been waiting, coiled like a spring. And that morning, in front of the flagpole, it would finally snap free. The sound was sharp, unmistakable. A book slamming against concrete, followed by laughter that sliced through the usual hum of Jefferson High's courtyard. Eleanor Reed's head jerked up. From her booth at the gate, she could see it. 3 older boys circling a younger one, his papers scattered like autumn leaves across the asphalt. The freshman was pressed against the flagpole, his face pale, hands trembling as he tried to gather his belongings. The tallest boy, broad shoulders, varsity jacket, shoved him again, the metallic clang of his back hitting the pole echoing through the square. Around them, students watched. Some whispered. Some half raised their phones. None intervened. Eleanor's chest tightened. She had seen cruelties before, smaller ones, brushed aside with smirks or shrugs. But this was open, public, brutal. Her fingers brushed against the leather notebook in her pocket. For years she had carried it, telling herself she would never need it. For years she had remained silent, invisible. Now the silence was unbearable. Her hand tightened around her key ring until the teeth dug into her palm. She stepped forward. "Stop right there!" Her voice rang out, sharp as a whip crack. It startled even her own ears. Heads turned, conversations cut short. The basketball game on the far end of the yard froze mid-play. Every eye in the courtyard shifted to the old gatekeeper. The woman most had never truly noticed. She walked forward, each step deliberate, the keys at her side jangling like spurs. "Do you boys know what the Education Code, Section 220, says about harassment on school grounds?" she demanded. The bullies blinked, confusion etched across their faces. The tallest tried to recover, his smirk returning. "What code? Lady, what are you even talking about?" Eleanor's spine straightened. In that moment, she wasn't just the gatekeeper. She was the professor again, the woman who once commanded lecture halls, who once made senators listen. Her voice carried across the courtyard with a steadiness that silenced every whisper. "You are violating not only school policy," she declared, "but state law. Section 220 guarantees that no student shall be harassed, humiliated, or discriminated against in any program receiving state financial assistance. That includes this school." A ripple moved through the crowd. Students glanced at one another, mouths half open. Someone whispered, "She knows the law." Another, "Wait, is she serious?" Eleanor reached into her jacket pocket and drew out the leather notebook. Its cover was worn, its pages softened from years of use, but her hands were steady as she flipped it open. Her eyes scanned the familiar underlines. When she spoke again, her words cut through the courtyard like the toll of a bell. California Education Code, Section 220. No person shall be subjected to discrimination on the basis of disability, gender, nationality, race, ethnicity, religion, sexual orientation, or any other characteristic in any program receiving state financial assistance. She snapped the book shut. The sound was final, undeniable. "Now," she said, extending her hand, "you will hand me your IDs, or I will call the principal, the superintendent, and if necessary—" Her gaze narrowed. The police. The tallest boy laughed nervously. You can't... But his voice faltered under the weight of the stares around him. Dozens of students were watching, some recording. His friends shifted, their bravado cracking. They were used to teachers yelling, to threats of detention. But this was different. The old gatekeeper had spoken the language of law, of authority that reached beyond the school's walls. One of them muttered, "She's bluffing." Eleanor's eyes locked onto his. "I don't bluff." Silence. The freshman still clutched the pole, eyes wide, his belongings strewn at his feet. The courtyard held its breath. Finally, the tallest boy bent down, picked up a notebook, and shoved it toward the freshman. "Here," he muttered. His friends followed, scooping up loose papers and pens. They mumbled apologies, not out of sincerity, but out of defeat. Then, avoiding Eleanor's eyes, they slipped through the crowd, disappearing into the school's doors. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the rustle of papers as the freshmen knelt to gather them. Then, a whisper rose from the crowd. "She quoted the law. Did you hear that? She's like a lawyer or something." "No. My cousin said she used to be a professor." The whispers spread like wildfire. Phones buzzed. Fingers typed furiously. The old gatekeeper just destroyed the football guys. The freshman finally stood, clutching his books to his chest. His voice was barely audible. "Thank you, ma'am." Eleanor gave the smallest of nods. Her chest ached, not with fear but with something she hadn't felt in years. Power. Purpose. The fire of justice she thought had died long ago. She slipped the notebook back into her pocket, her hand lingering on its worn cover. For years she had carried it like a relic. Today, it had been a sword. As she walked back toward her booth, the students' eyes followed her. No longer indifferent, no longer dismissive. Curious, respectful, even awed. When she sat down again, her heart was still pounding. She stared at the gate, at the iron bars glowing in the autumn sun. Her silence had ended. Her invisibility had shattered. Eleanor Reed, once the forgotten gatekeeper, had found her voice again. A new rumor. By afternoon, the story had spread through every hallway. Students whispered in classrooms, in locker rooms, in the cafeteria. She stood up to them. She quoted the law like she memorized it. I think she used to teach. Teachers heard the rumors too, some with skepticism, others with surprise. A few glanced at Eleanor differently that day, as though seeing her for the first time. She did not bask in it. She did not speak of it. But inside, a small ember glowed brighter than it had in years. Justice was not gone. It had only been waiting. The incident at the flagpole did not vanish with the morning bell. It lingered, stretching its shadow across the entire day. By lunch, whispers of what had happened circled through the cafeteria like wildfire. She made them pick up his books. She quoted the law, word for word. She was scary, like a judge or something. Videos surfaced online within hours, shaky phone footage of the confrontation. The sound wasn't perfect, but Eleanor's voice cut through. No person shall be subjected to discrimination. By the time the last bell rang, nearly everyone at Jefferson High had heard the story. For the first time in years, Eleanor Reed was not invisible. Whispers and stares. That afternoon, as she locked the gate, she felt the stares. Not mocking, not dismissive, curious. A pair of girls walked past and whispered loudly enough for her to hear. Do you think she was really a professor? My brother swears she taught at the state university. A group of boys from the basketball team gave her a wide berth, their usual loud jokes subdued. One even offered a quiet, "Good evening, ma'am," before hurrying away. Eleanor's face remained calm, but inside her chest, something stirred. It wasn't pride. Not exactly. It was the awareness that a door had reopened, one she thought had closed forever. The faculty lounge murmurs. Even the teachers were not immune to the rumors. In the faculty lounge, over coffee and stale donuts, voices rose and fell. Did you hear about the Gatekeeper? Apparently, she quoted the California Education Code, right in front of everyone. Really? That old woman? One of the kids said she used to be a law professor. Some scoffed. Others frowned. A few looked thoughtful. Principal Harris, a man in his late 40s with a receding hairline, leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temple. If that's true, he muttered, then maybe we've underestimated her. But the truth was, no one knew. Eleanor never spoke of her past. To most of the staff, she had simply appeared one day, an elderly widow working part-time at the gate. Until now. The freshman returns. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at her usual time. She unlocked the gates, the air crisp with the smell of wet grass and autumn leaves. She expected the day to continue with its usual rhythm, but as she settled into her booth, she saw the freshman from yesterday approaching. He walked hesitantly, his books clutched to his chest as if afraid they might be stolen again. His eyes darted nervously, then fixed on her. "Mrs. Reed?" His voice cracked slightly. Eleanor looked up. "Yes?" He fumbled in his bag, pulling out a small red apple. He held it out awkwardly, his hand trembling. "This is for you. For helping me." Her chest tightened. She stared at the apple, simple and imperfect, its skin mottled with tiny bruises. She accepted it carefully, as though it were fragile crystal. "Thank you," she said softly. He hesitated, then blurted, "I want to be like you one day. I want to study law. Because of you." Eleanor's breath caught. For a moment she could not speak. Decades of silence, invisibility, dismissal, all undone by the trembling voice of a boy with too big glasses and too thin shoulders. She smiled, though her eyes shimmered. "Then you must promise me one thing." "What?" "Never forget that law isn't about power. It's about protection, especially for those who cannot protect themselves." He nodded solemnly, as though she had handed him not advice, but a vow. Then he hurried off toward the building, leaving Eleanor alone with the apple in her hand. A new reputation. By the end of the week, Eleanor had a new nickname among the students, the Gatekeeper of Justice. At first, she found it amusing, but soon it became clear it was more than a joke. Students began approaching her, tentatively at first, then with growing confidence. "Mrs. Reed, is it true teachers can't punish us for asking questions? Do we really have the right to report bullying without getting in trouble? What should I do if someone keeps harassing me online?" Eleanor answered each question with patience, drawing not only on her memory, but on the well of conviction she thought had dried. She did not overwhelm them with legal jargon. She spoke plainly, directly, always with the reminder that justice was not abstract. It was lived. Soon, her booth at the gate became more than a checkpoint. It became a place of counsel. Students lingered before class, some just to say hello, others to ask questions. Even teachers began nodding to her with respect they had never shown before. The principal's visit. One afternoon, Principal Harris stopped by her booth. His expression was measured, polite, but cautious. "Mrs. Reed," he began, "I wanted to thank you for intervening the other day. I saw the reports and the videos." He cleared his throat. "It seems you made quite an impression." Eleanor inclined her head. "I did what was necessary." "Yes, well..." He hesitated, then asked, "Is it true that you were a law professor?" For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, "Yes." Harris nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of the answer. I see. Well, Jefferson High could use more guidance. Students respect you. I think it's clear you've become more than a gatekeeper. He left it at that, but Eleanor felt the shift. For years, she had been invisible even to him. Now, he looked at her as though seeing not just the woman in the booth, but the professor who had once commanded halls. The open classroom. The weeks that followed transformed Eleanor's life. Every morning, students greeted her with respect. Some waved, some lingered to ask questions. She noticed that the same freshman who had once been cornered now walked taller, flanked by classmates who defended him. Even the bullies avoided her gaze, their swagger dimmed. They knew the gatekeeper was watching. Her booth became a classroom without walls. She explained rights, responsibilities, and respect. She reminded students that laws were not shackles, but shields. Slowly, she wove a culture of awareness around her post. And though she never lectured in a hall again, she felt something she had missed for years: purpose. Reflection. One evening, after locking the gates, Eleanor walked home with the apple still sitting on her desk in the booth. She carried her leather notebook in her hand, flipping through its worn pages. She stopped at a passage she had once underlined so fiercely, the ink bled through. Education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. It is the very foundation of good citizenship. She whispered the words aloud, her voice trembling but steady. For years, she had feared her knowledge no longer mattered, that her fire had been extinguished. But now, she realized, justice had only been waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right students. And she had found them again. The last scene. 1. Crisp morning in late October, Eleanor stood at her post, watching students stream through the gate. Laughter, chatter, the clatter of lockers, life surged forward. The freshman approached, now smiling, his backpack zipped tightly, his books held securely. He paused before her booth. "Good morning, Mrs. Reed." "Good morning," she replied warmly. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you think I could visit your house sometime, to see your books? I want to learn more." Eleanor's throat tightened. She pictured her shelves, dusty, untouched, heavy with years of silence. For the first time in a long time, she saw them not as relics but as seeds waiting to grow. "Yes," she said softly. "You may." The bell rang. Students hurried inside. Eleanor stood alone at the gate, the autumn wind tugging at her jacket. She touched her notebook, felt the weight of its pages. She was no longer just the old woman at the gate. She was what she had always been: a teacher, a guardian, a defender of justice. And though the world had tried to forget her, Jefferson High never would again.